And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and this is Brewing with Underwhelming Commanders, episode 27. And this episode is going to be a typical Underwhelming Commanders episode. However, the next one is not. And I thought I would make this announcement at the start of the video so nobody missed it. I have a poll in the description as usual for you guys to vote which commanders you want to see. However, I've decided that the next video in this series is going to be a real-time deck building video. I have wanted to make a real-time deck building video again for a while. It was the first video I ever made on my channel, actually. And I've had a lot of requests for it. A lot of people want to see how I go through the process. I've started doing my Commander Staples series as well, talking about how that's part of the process in which I make decks. So the poll in the description will be just as it usually is. However, you are voting to see which commander I build in real time. That's what you're voting for. I will not be doing the usual three. Only whichever commander gets the most votes on that poll in the next video in this series, I will be building that deck in real time. I thought this would be a good way to go about it as far as doing a real-time deck building video. So just so you guys know, that is what you're voting for. So moving on to the video for this week, coming in at number 3, we have Varis Silverymoon Ranger, 1 green, human elf ranger, 3/3. Reach, ward 1. Whenever you cast a creature or planeswalker spell, venture into the dungeon. This ability triggers only once each turn. And whenever you complete a dungeon, create a 2/2 green wolf creature token. So I threw this one on the poll. You know, I've had a couple of requests for dungeon commanders. I'm not a huge fan of the dungeon thing myself. A lot of other people aren't as well, judging by the popularity of some of these commanders. And this seemed like one that seemed pretty easy to venture into the dungeon, right? If you want to be doing that, this seems like a good commander for it because just casting a creature planeswalker spell is pretty easy, right? So the build around here, I don't think is really that difficult. You want to be casting creature and planeswalker spells. You want to be doing it though on everyone's turn because this ability triggers only once each turn. So if you can do it every player's turn, you can be doing it a lot more, obviously. The payoff's not great. The payoff for completing a dungeon's also not great, just getting a wolf token. So definitely this is an underwhelming commander, no doubt about it. We certainly want to put the other dungeon stuff in here as well, though. If you're building this deck, you're going to want Dungeon Descent, you're going to want Dungeon Map, because they're just going to allow you to venture into the dungeon, and you're going to be doing a lot of that anyway. Wandering Troubadour will allow you to venture into the dungeon at the beginning of your end step if you played a land this turn, and you find a cursed idol is actually not a bad spell. 1 and a green sorcery, and you can destroy an artifact or enchantment, so that's something you're always going to want to do in a commander deck. Or you can create a treasure token and venture into the dungeon, so not bad. Definitely want to put that in your Varis deck. When I was doing some preparation for this guy, I was looking at the dungeons and I was like, you know, it would be great if you could figure out a theme that you could actually build around the dungeons. You know, if there was a theme that fit with a certain dungeon, you could just build your deck around that one dungeon and just keep going through that dungeon, and the whatever you were doing in your deck would actually fit what that dungeon was doing. But there wasn't really anything that fit. The only one I found was Tomb of Annihilation, which sort of had a actual theme to it, because each player loses 1 life, each player loses 2 life unless they discard a card, each player loses 2 life unless they sacrifice an artifact, creature, or land. So I thought there was a similar theme there, but it's a lose life theme that doesn't really fit in green. Maybe you could do that if you were in a black deck or something like that. I just didn't find any of the dungeons, and I took a pretty close look at them, that you could actually really build your deck around. It was just essentially a lot of good stuff, scrying and drawing cards and making tokens and stuff. I don't think building around specific dungeons really is a theme you can go with. Mainly we want to just be getting value out of those dungeons by venturing into the dungeon as much as we can. And in order to do that, we have to be casting creatures on our opponent's turn, which of course we can do with flash creatures. And there is quite a bit of creatures in mono green that have flash. You could really just do entirely a flash deck in mono green. There is enough creatures to do that. So you could build around that theme rather than building around the dungeon theme. You could just use dungeons as an advantage to you, just as free value, and go with a flash in creatures scenario. Yevon Nature's Herald obviously is the best fit here because not only does it have flash, gives all your green creatures flash as well, including your commander, right? I just think that is a good theme to go with in general. And if you really want to go nuts, you could put Allure in your deck. 2 green enchantment. any player may cast creature cards with mana value 3 or less without paying their mana cost and do it as though they had flash. So this can be a really dangerous card. You know, obviously your opponents can use it as well. The interesting thing here is our commander is a creature with mana value 3 or less, so we can cast our commander for free with flash. But this will enable you to very easily, you don't even need the mana, cast creatures on all your opponent's turns and venture into the dungeon very, very quickly. So that is a way you could go with it if you want to. In mono green, there's no way you're going to get Lurin into your hand other than just drawing it, or maybe some of those colorless tutor effects that I have on my colorless tutor list. You can check out. Those are options as well. It is a card that you could throw in here, and you know, at the right moment, maybe if you play it, you could really go off. If we actually complete a dungeon, we are creating 2/2 green wolf tokens, so we can build around that theme as well. I'm not sure how quickly you can complete dungeons. Again, typically 4 times. So I guess in a turn cycle, you could actually complete a dungeon if you wanted to. So you could be creating a 2/2 green wolf token on every turn cycle, sort of. Parallel lives and second harvest, right? We can do the token doublers here. That will help. And we could also obviously do a wolf theme. There is a lot of support there as well. Ren's Run Packmaster is interesting. 3 and a green elf warrior 5/5 has champion an elf, and our commander is an elf. So you can champion your commander here if you want to. Of course, then our commander won't be on the battlefield, so we won't get any more wolf tokens. But maybe after you've created a bunch, you can play your Ren's Run Packmaster. It creates wolf tokens itself and gives wolves death touch, so that's pretty good. Night Pack Ambusher is a great one. 2 green green wolf 4/4 has flash, so fits the flash theme. This is probably an auto include in a Varus deck, I think. Other wolves and werewolves you control get +1/+1, and at the beginning of your end step, if you didn't cast a spell this turn, create a 2/2 green wolf creature token, which is very doable in a deck if you have lots of flash creatures, right? You could just forego casting stuff on your turn. Master of the Wild Hunt is another fantastic one. 2 green green human shaman 3/3. At the beginning of your upkeep, just create a 2/2 green wolf creature token. So that's going to be a great fit in the deck. And you can tap it and tap all untapped wolf creatures you control. Each wolf tapped this way deals damage equal to its power to target creature. That creature deals damage equal to its power divided as its controller chooses among any number of those wolves. This is just a great card in general. Just spits out wolf tokens on your upkeep. You can use it as removal. I think it's a really good card in a commander game. There's lots of wolf support in mono green. There's lots of flash creatures in mono green. There's lots of token support in mono green. So you would probably want to do a bunch of those things in your Varus deck. I would do all of them. Obviously, you're doing the dungeons anyway, making tokens, build around that theme, build around the flashing out creatures theme, I think, as well. So there is enough stuff there to build an interesting deck with this, I think. But moving on to our number 2 commander this week, and it is Torgaar, Famine Incarnate. And this was another one when it went back and forth quite a bit between Torgaar and our number 1 winner. 6 black, 8 mana, that's a lot. 7/6 avatar, but as an additional cost to cast this spell, you may sacrifice any number of creatures. This spell costs 2 less to cast for each creature sacrificed this way. So you can reduce the cost of your commander by quite a bit. Obviously, if you sacrifice 3 creatures, your commander is only going to cost black and a black. That's pretty good for a 7/6, but also when it enters the battlefield, up to 1 target player's life total becomes half their starting life total, rounded down. This is a commander that I thought was going to be more popular because that is a pretty powerful ability. Reducing the cost of your commander is always a good thing. Having your opponent's life totals is always a good thing. So obviously that option is there, right? When this enters the battlefield, if your opponent has 40 life, you're going to knock them down to 20. That's really, really good. It's not really something you need to build around necessarily, though. I mean, it's just good in general. You can put in Exquisite Blood in this deck. That probably would be fantastic here because whenever an opponent loses life, you gain that much life. So if your opponent loses 20 life, you're going to now gain 20 life. So that seems like a great fit. I mean, Exquisite Blood is a pretty great fit in any commander deck. Particularly good here, though. You obviously are going to want sack fodder in this deck as well. Again, there's tons of options there in black. Carrion and Sengir Autocrat are my personal favorites. Sengir Autocrat will enter the battlefield giving you 3/01 black surf tokens. So that's 4 creatures total you're getting for 4 mana. And so sacrificing all 4 of them will reduce the cost of our commander by 8. So now if our commander has died, we can reduce all 8 of the colorless mana and only pay the 2 black. So that's pretty good for only 4. And Carrion actually can work with our commander here, right? So 1 black instant. As an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice a creature creature, create X, 01 black insect creature tokens where X is the sacrifice creature's power. So if our commander's in play, we can sacrifice our commander with this and we will get 701 black insect creature tokens. And of course, assuming we've cast our commander only once, again, we only have to sacrifice 4 of them to then cast our commander for only 2 black mana again. If our commander's died a few times, right? This can reduce our commander's cost by up to 14. 7 creatures we're going to get, and we can sack all of them to our commander. So this is just an auto include in a Torgaar deck, I think. For me, though, I think the most interesting way to go with a Torgaar deck is to use his ability on yourself, right? That's the interesting part here. This can be any player that is halving their life total, but with us, we're not going to half it. We're going to actually increase it. When this enters the battlefield, up to one target player's life total becomes half their starting life total. So if your life total is below half your starting life total, it will go up to that, right? So your starting life total is 40. So at any point, if your life total is less than 20, Torgaar actually will make you gain life. So a really interesting strategy here is to play a little bit of a life gain theme, I think. But more importantly, you want to get your life low, so you want a pay life theme. So cards like Greed and Arguel's Bloodfast, where we can pay mana and life to draw cards. We just draw a whole bunch of cards, get our life total down to 2 or 3 or whatever, cast our commander, and then our life total pops back up to 20. Obviously in black, there is an absolute ton of cards that fit this theme. You can even play the really busted ones like Bolas's Citadel or Necropotence. Just pay tons and tons and tons and tons of life, get tons of value. You're down to like 1 life, cast your commander, pop you right back up to 20. I mean, Crick will work here, Doom Whisperer, stuff where you can just pay tons of life, get tons of value out of it. You can even play something like Minion of the Waste or Phyrexian Processor, where you can just pay a whole whack of life all at once and then get it all back immediately. Plague of Vermin and Pain's Reward are really fun, interesting ones that I've mentioned in my 10 cards video that I think will work really great here, where you can be paying a whole bunch of life and then get it all back. Demon of Death's Gate is a really fantastic fit here, I think. 6 black, 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 9 mana, flying trample 9/9, but you may pay 6 life and sacrifice 3 black creatures rather than pay its mana cost. So we're already in that theme. We're in a theme where we're paying life and sacrificing creatures, so we can just sacrifice 3 of those insect tokens that we have and pay 6 life and get a 9/9 flying trample for essentially free. So that's a great fit with Torgaar. And then of course, Font of Agonies, because we have so many of these pay life effects, we're going to be putting a ton of those blood counters on our Font of Agonies, and then we can pay 1 and a black and remove 4 blood counters from it to destroy target creature. So that's got to go in the deck. We also want some blinking. We don't necessarily want to be casting our commander all the time, so we got to put Conjurer's Closet in there. Our commander does have an ETB, so rather than having to recast it to get that effect, we can just pay a bunch of life into one of our pay life effects, and then on our end step, blink our commander, our life total pops back up to 20. Cold Storage and Voyager Staff are other colorless ways to use this, right? Obviously, black doesn't have a ton of blink effects. What it does have, though, is recursion and, of course, those what I call slingshot effects. So a Reanimate, for example, we can just 1 mana put our commander back into play, and the life we're losing, we're not going to care about, right? We're going to lose 8 life from putting our commander back into play, but then we're immediately going to pop back up to 20, so it won't matter. Feign Death as well will work great. Just 1 mana, and if our commander dies or we can sacrifice it, it'll slingshot back into play with a +1/+1 counter on it, and then we will get that ETB effect again. And how are we going to win with this deck? Well, I think the obvious way is repay in kind, right? Because we have so many pay life effects, we can pay life down to say 1, cast our repay in kind, and each player's life total becomes the lowest life total among all players. So everyone's life total will become 1. Pretty easy to win the game from there. We can also use Profane Transfusion, Soul Conduit, right? These will exchange players' life totals. So again, we can just pay our life total down really low, exchange with someone else, and then we'll gain our life back again. So that is Torgaar. A lot of really interesting ideas there to run with. And again, I'm kind of surprised this guy isn't more popular. I thought he would be. It's in a sacrifice theme with which people like, and I know there's probably a lot of other commanders that are doing that. I just really like the life swapping theme there, where we can, yes, use this on our opponent. Maybe on the first time we cast our commander, we'll knock someone down to 20, and then the next time we'll use it on ourselves to get us back up to 20, right? I think that's a really interesting theme. And remember, you're also in a little bit of a life gain theme. When you go back up to 20, you are gaining life. So a lot of those life gain themes will work as well here. But moving on to our number 1 commander this week, and it is Tygam Sadisi's Hand, and another commander that I'm shocked it isn't more popular. This probably fits into the theme, like the video I did of commanders, I'm shocked how unpopular they are. I don't think this is very underwhelming. I think there's a lot of interesting things going on here, but maybe people don't know what to do with it. So 3 blue and a black human wizard, 3/4. Skip your draw step. So that's not great. However, at the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top 3 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand and the rest of them into your graveyard. That's a really great ability, not only because you're looking at the top 3 cards of your library and you get to choose which one you want, but also you get to put stuff in your graveyard, of course, and that can be really, really good. Also, you can pay black and tap, exile X cards from your graveyard. Target creature gets -X/-X until end of turn. So that's also nice to have on our commander. We probably will have lots of cards in our graveyard, so we can use our commander for removal if we want to. I don't know if you'll be doing that a lot. We won't in this deck, but it is a nice option to have. So I'm going to first talk about the cards that I think go in any Taigam deck. Cards that just are a great fit with Taigam that I'm putting in this deck. Then after I cover those cards, right, if you don't like the theme I went with in this deck, because I did go a very particular theme here, if you don't like that theme, the first group of cards that I mentioned are cards that are just great in a Taigam deck. So if you decide to go a different direction, those are cards that you can include as well. So first off, Asmodeus, the Archfiend, and Psychic Possession. And as you can probably tell by looking at these cards, the reason why they are a great fit is because you are also skipping your draws. So the downside to these cards isn't going to really affect us as much because we're already skipping our draw step, right? Psychic Possession, you skip your draw step. So their downside there doesn't exist because we're already doing that. And whenever the opponent we enchant draws a card, we get to draw a card. So there's just extra value for us. And Asmodeus, if you would draw a card, exile top card of your library face down instead. So that isn't hurting us as much with Taigam because Taigam's ability is allowing us to look at those cards and put them into our hand. We're not actually drawing them. So we still get to do that if Asmodeus is in play. And of course, you can pay 3 black to draw 7 cards, and you can pay 1 black to return all cards exiled with Asmodeus to owner's hand. You lose that much life. So I think it is a good fit if you're looking for something that just fits with Taigam. Also cards like Vengeful Pharaoh, Daring Fiendbonder, right? Creatures that you just want in your graveyard. There's lots of cards out there that just would prefer to be in your graveyard rather than your hand. I think Vengeful Pharaoh is particularly good because whenever combat damage is dealt to you or a planeswalker you control, if it's in your graveyard, you destroy target attacking creature, then put it back on top of your library. And guess what? On our upkeep, we're going to then look at those cards again and put it back into our graveyard. So we can continually put it in our graveyard over and over again. So I think that's an auto include in a Taigam deck. I also really like Pedantic Learning in a Taigam deck because, I mean, it's a card that I try to put in a lot of decks. I think it's a great card. I mentioned on my 10 cards video. Blue and a blue enchantment. Whenever a land is put into your graveyard from your library, you may pay 1 if you do draw cards. So with Taigam, if we look at those top 3 cards and there's a land in there, we put it into our graveyard. It is going from our library to our graveyard. So that will trigger our Pedantic Learning. We can pay 1 and draw a card. And I think you might be doing that on every single turn, possibly, unless you actually want the land in your hand so you can play it. And then, of course, we also need Paradox Haze and possibly Sphinx of the Second Sun because they're going to give us an additional upkeep. And when I mentioned Paradox Haze in my 10 cards videos and said that that was the only card that did that, people were like, hey, what about Sphinx of the Second Sun? Yes, I suppose Sphinx of the Second Sun technically does give you another upkeep. It gives you another additional beginning phase, which of course is the only card that actually mentions that scenario. Your beginning phase meaning your untap, upkeep, and draw. So why do we want these cards in the deck? Well, of course, because our commander has an at the beginning of upkeep trigger. So if you are making a Taigam deck, period, you probably are going to want these cards in there, particularly Paradox Haze, because at the beginning of your upkeep, you're going to look at the top 3 cards of your library, put 1 into your hand and the other in your graveyard, and then you're going to do it again because you have another upkeep. So this ability will trigger again. So it's got to go in there. But what am I doing in my Tygam Sadisi's hand deck? I mean, you could just do a Reanimator strategy, I guess. There's a lot of graveyard strategies that will work here. I went with a more unique, interesting one because that's what I like to do. And I decided to steal one of my own ideas from my latest 10 deck ideas video about hating on our opponent's graveyards. Essentially, the idea of that deck was we want our opponents to not have any graveyards at all, but we want to have stuff in our graveyard. And of course, Taigam fits the theme of putting stuff in our graveyard. And most of the cards that fit in that theme in general were in black and blue. So I thought that theme fit really nice here. So first off, we want to be hating on our opponent's graveyard. We prefer that they don't have any cards in their graveyard at all, and I will eventually get to why that is. Dothy Voidwalker and Leyline of the Void, of course, are probably the best options here because no cards are going to be going to our opponent's graveyards at all from anywhere, and it doesn't affect us, right? That is the dream scenario for us. Leyline of Void's probably the best option here because it's an enchantment. It's going to be harder to remove. We're not going to be tempted to use it like our Dothy Voidwalker, right? You might want to sack it to use it for one of those spells that you've exiled with a void counter on it. We can get it back from our graveyard. We do have some recursion here, so that is a possibility. Gissa Glorious Resurrector I also put in here. If a creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead. So this is going to ensure opponents won't get any creatures in their graveyard. They will get other stuff, but not the creatures, which is helpful. And also her other ability at the beginning of your upkeep, put all creatures exiled with Gissa into play under your control with Decayed. That's also pretty good, so that's a good fit in here. Zat's Will is a great one. 4 and a black instant. Choose one. If you control a commander, you may choose both. Each opponent sacrifices a creature they control with the greatest power. That's pretty darn good. More so though, exile all cards from all opponents' graveyards, then create X01 black thrall creature tokens where X is the greatest power among creature cards exiled this way. This is really just a great card all around. If you can get both of these, just making your opponents sacrifice their best creatures and exiling all your opponents' graveyards and getting all those thrill tokens, that's a lot of value for one card, and especially at instant speed. So great fit here. Also got Phyrexian Scriptures. I just really like this card all around because you're going to put a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control. That creature becomes an artifact, but then the next chapter you're going to destroy all non-artifact creatures, so it kind of becomes a, one-sided board wipe in a way if you don't care that much, and we don't. In this deck, we can put this on our commander and then kill all the other creatures on the next main phase, and that should be totally okay with us. But then chapter 3, we're going to exile all cards from opponents' graveyards. Again, it's another one that is going to exile all of our opponents' graveyards, but not ours. That's really important. And also Mnemonic Betrayal works great here. 1 blue and a black sorcery. Exile all cards from all opponents' graveyards. That's exactly what we want to be doing. You may cast those cards this turn, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any type to cast those spells at the beginning of your next end step. If those cards remain exiled, return them to owners' graveyards and exile Mnemonic Betrayal. So this is obviously a one-shot. So if there's one of our effects that we want to be using where we don't want our opponent's graveyards to have anything in them, we can cast this, exile all our opponent's graveyards. We can use them if we want. We got extra mana lying around, but more so it's a one-shot, exile our opponent's graveyard so that we can do that spell that we want. And then after it's resolved, we don't care if that stuff goes back in there. So for example, Living Death and Twilight's Call. Right? Getting to the now let's take advantage of the fact that our opponents have no graveyards. Both of these will return all creature cards from graveyards to the battlefield. And of course, if our opponents don't have any, it's a one-sided effect. So they're both going to be great there. Magus of the Bridge and Bridge from Below both work great here. Whenever a non-token creature we control dies, we get a 2/2 black zombie creature token. That's great. But whenever a creature an opponent controls died, we have to exile them. And if our opponent's creatures are never hitting the graveyard, and there's a lot of effects that we have in this deck that will ensure our opponent's creatures don't actually hit the graveyard, they get exiled instead, these will never go away. So I thought they were a great fit. I really like Ill-Gotten Gains here, 2 black sorcery. Another one I mentioned in my 10 cards video. Each player discards their hand, then returns up to 3 cards from their graveyard to their hand. So this will make all of our opponents discard their hands. We get to return 3 things from our graveyard to our hand. And of course, we probably don't really mind that much if we're discarding our hand even because we kind of want stuff in our graveyard. So this can be a complete blowout for us in the game. Gravestorm is another one that I've just been wanting to put in a deck for a long time, and it's a great fit here. Black enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, target opponent may exile a card from their graveyard. If that player doesn't, you may draw a card. So if our opponents don't have graveyards, we just get to draw a card on our upkeep every turn. So it's sort of like a bit of a poor man's Phyrexian Arena. Keeper of the Dead, also a great fit here. Black and a black human wizard, 1/2. Pay black and tap. Destroy target non-black creature controlled by target opponent who had at least 2 fewer creature cards in their graveyard than you did as you activated this ability. This is just a pretty good card in general if you plan on having lots of creatures in your graveyard. For us, we're guaranteed going to have it because our opponents probably won't have any. So this just becomes pay black and tap to destroy target non-black creature. Pretty darn good. But the real ones that are going to shut down the game and be serious win cons for us are Web of Inertia and Mist of Stagnation. These are the ones I mentioned in my 10 deck ideas video. Web of inertia will just not allow our opponents to attack us at all, because at the beginning of each opponent's combat step, they have to exile a card from their graveyard, and if they don't, they can't attack us. So they can only attack each other. You know, maybe they will do that. They can't attack us. As long as we can keep their graveyards empty, we just can't be attacked at all, which is great. And Mist of Stagnation will completely shut them down because permanents don't untap during their controller's untap step. Lands, everything don't untap. But at the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player chooses a permanent for each card in their graveyard, then untaps those permanents. This is why having stuff in our graveyard is going to be really important. And for our opponents, not having stuff is going to be really important because this can completely lock down the game. It will be game over pretty quickly once this hits the table if our opponents have nothing in their graveyard and if we have lots of stuff in our graveyard. Even if they can manage to get a couple things in their graveyard, like say they destroy our Leyline of the Void, their Krosan Grip now goes to the graveyard, they only have one thing in their graveyard now, right? So at the beginning of their upkeep, they can untap just one permanent because they only have one card in their graveyard, right? So even if they manage to get our graveyard hate stuff off the table, it is going to take them a while to start actually untapping their stuff. We should be able to close out the game by then. Pretty interesting deck. Again, I thought, okay, the Taigam wins and there's a lot of things you can do here. I thought I was going to maybe do that hating on your opponent's graveyard thing in my building janky deck series. I decided to do it here instead. Pretty interesting deck I think I put together here. Of course, the deck list is in the description below for Tygam Sadisi's hand. Check it out if you want. And also the poll, again, is in the description. And again, I am doing a real-time deck building video for that poll, right? So whatever commander you are voting for, only the top one I'm going to do in the next Underwhelming Commanders episode, and it's going to be a real-time deck building video. So stay tuned for that one. That is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.